Hi, everyone. Welcome to the first episode of Let's Be Soulful. I am transparently filming this at 8:30 at night because I've been putting it off because I've been absolutely terrified. And it feels scary, but also exciting. And I've learned through over 10 years of living guided by my soul that soulfully aligned things are not always easy, but that doesn't mean that they're not the right thing for us. And so I'm super excited to have you all here. When I was thinking about a podcast and just a way to share with my community long form, I really wanted to highlight, I guess, the main theme of my work and also what I'm passionate about, which is the soul. I think that the soul is the most exciting, beautiful, magical part of being alive, is cultivating a really strong and authentic connection with our soul because it is the way that we live a life that feels true and exciting and just custom made for us. And I think if we try to try to live without the soul, we're always going to end up having a life experience that isn't as rich and fulfilling and incredible as it could be. So, I'm going to give you guys a little bit of my background and then go into what I call my soul origin story, which is essentially when I became aware of spirituality, having a soul, and then the main experiences that helped me validate the, I would say, importance, but also like legitimacy of living by the soul, because I was very skeptical at first. And then I had these very wild experiences that led me to say, okay, I can trust in this whole idea of living with the soul. And so if you're listening to this, I'm sure you know who I am, but my name is Sean. I'm go by Sean Nicole a little bit on the internet, but that's just because I have the most common boy's name, Sean Murphy. Nicole is indeed my middle name, but I never use it in my day-to-day life. It's just there are loads of people named Sean Murphy. But I have had many jobs throughout my life, and I will explain those as we go through the podcast. But I got into spiritual work in 2020. Yes, it would have been 2020 when I started. And my first, I guess, way that I found my way to doing work with clients and around the soul was through a system called human design. So I got very obsessed with human design in 2017, I would say, is when I started to get into it. And then essentially learned a ton about human design, did a training through a big mentor of mine, Jenna Zoe. I learned human design from her, then ended up becoming a human design reader. And then that unlocked all my intuitive gifts. And then I now am an intuitive and I focus on helping people connect deeply with their souls, mainly through finding soul aligned work. But in 2025, I'm really just focused on helping people connect to their souls so they can build these incredible, beautiful, rich, fulfilling lives. And human design is a part of that. But I've expanded to then incorporate intuition and my clairvoyance and all that good stuff. So in this podcast, and this will be on YouTube too. So, hey, if you're watching the video of my room in Costa Rica, um, I really want to discuss life when we approach it from soul first. And I think that when we choose to put our soul first, everything in our lives gets infinitely better. Our relationship with ourselves, with our bodies, with food, with our work, with our people in our lives, everything just gets so much better. And there's a passage in the Course in Miracles, which is a text I adore. I will link it here in the show notes that says, "There's nothing that my holiness cannot do." And it always makes me think about the holy nature of ourselves, the soul, because our mind is holy, but we have to really go through a lot of effort to think holy, quote unquote, holy thoughts, like even think healthy thoughts, right? Like minds are not naturally like these healthy, radiant beings. But our holiness, our soul, our essence is so fucking capable and can do anything. And when we really learn to tap into that and apply that and live that, it's wild what happens. And I'm really going to talk about me discovering my soul and what that really created for me and how my life looks nothing like I would have ever imagined it to look like. But you guys, I feel like, hold up. Okay, there was like some weird feedback. It's my first time recording. So we're still getting used to that up if you can hear me like rustling around in my chair. Um, how everything in our life just gets wildly amazing. And what I'm going to share about today is like, so my life now looks nothing like I probably would have imagined it to look like when I was 21, when my soul origin story happened. Nothing. Like I'm stunned, but it feels great and I love it. And I really feel very at home within myself and so at peace with who I really am. And I feel like I know who I really am. And even that feels like such a holy grail because so much of what we're taught to do is deny who we really are. And that is super messed up, but that's just the world we live in. So, my soul origin story is what created this desire for me to live soulfully and then created the relationship that I have with myself and a life that feels aligned, even though there are days where it's hard and I'm still a human being and being a human is not easy. I know that the truth of who I am and the truth of what I am is so much bigger than anything I could ever imagine. And when I can decide and trust that I'm going to let that part of me create my life and not limitations. Sorry, I'm hearing all this weird feedback. It's breaking. We're going to keep going. Okay. Then that's when things get better than we could ever imagine them to be. So, my soul origin story. Well, it would be all about my dear father, Stephen John Murphy, born in 1950 in San Francisco, California. He was and is one of the great loves of my life. Growing up, he was such a emotionally present, stable, just really supportive father figure for me. And he was very soulful. It's funny because, like, looking back and realizing how much he really was a man who knew himself and lived by his soul. And he was really the center of my universe. I loved him. And I don't like using past tense because, as I'll explain on this podcast, I have a really deep relationship with his essence that I believe never passed away. So I don't love using past tense. Like, I obviously still love him with my whole heart. But his relationship and his presence in my life was so profoundly important. I think he is what he instilled in me so many important characteristics and things that I can so confidently say I am who I am in so many ways because he was my father. He taught me how to treat people with kindness and respect and how to be well mannered and well behaved and follow what matters to me and stand strong in what's important to me and have good values. And he just was the ultimate, I'd say, father figure in that way. And I could go on about him for days, and I'm sure I will bring him up all the time. But what I really want this episode to be about is what really happened when he passed away, as far as like my relationship with my soul and it coming online, because I did not have any awareness and I was young in quotes, right? Like I know there's so many people now who are having their awakenings at like 16, but I was 21 years old, so I didn't really have any awareness around my soul or, the universe or anything like that. And I would have probably had no curiosity about those things had this event not happened. And when you're understanding or going through an awakening, I think sometimes it will be this like crazy experience that the universe kind of just like dumps, not I don't say dumps on you, but it will feel that way. You'll be like, what the hell happened here? But that is to catalyze the awakening. And for those of you lucky folks who have a gradual awakening that happens slowly and peacefully, I'm really happy for you. But you're probably not listening to this episode. So the universe, I think, will sometimes put these like big, what feel catastrophic events on our path so we can awaken. And this is what happened. So when I was 21 years old, I was in my senior year at the University of California, Los Angeles for all my Bruins. And senior year was a really hard time for me because I was having a lot of existential crises around what I was going to do for work. I was obsessed with the ocean, but I knew I didn't want to do marine research. I had done some research projects and I just found research to be really boring. But I was like, I don't know what I'm going to do because I'm obsessed with the ocean, but I can't really think of any other career options. And then I also had a lot of anxiety around living in a city again because I had just spent 4 years in university in Los Angeles. And I especially do not like the city of LA, y'all. It is just not my place. But I don't really like cities. I thrive in the jungle. And so I just had all this inner turmoil. I was like, I don't know what I'm going to do. And I don't know how how I'm going to find a way to basically create a life I really love and enjoy after college. And that terrified me. So I was going through a lot of, I'd say, spiritual initiations. I was getting a bit curious about meditation and things like that. And the summer before my senior year of college, I read Eat, Pray, Love, which was the game changer. Elizabeth Gilbert, you are forever and always my favorite author. And that really piqued a lot of curiosity in me. I started to meditate and was like, okay, I'm getting on board with this whole like, I'm more than just this human being right here, right now. There's more depth to things. And my dad was sick at the time, but he was not so sick that we ever thought that he would pass away. And his sickness also, it happened really quickly. Like his physical deterioration happened incredibly rapidly to the point where I almost never think about it or remember it. And I love it that way. My memories of my dad are as the happy, healthy, handsome, incredible human being that he was. I actually don't think that there's a lot of value in remembering who he was at all when he was sick. And looking back, it's tragic that it happened so fast, but I'm also kind of grateful that I don't have a lot of memories of him like that because that is just not who he really was. And I don't try to linger there because like my dad was present in his healthy, beautiful state of being for really 20 years of my life. So I don't need to fixate on this little blip in time when he was sick. But I only bring this up because the progression and the suddenness is what made the event feel like such a fucking catastrophe. Like truly, like I think of my life as before he passed away and after he passed away. And it was this giant, massive kind of, it felt like wound that would never heal. I did indeed heal and continue to heal it, which I'll share about. I keep slapping my microphone because I talk with my hands like all good Italians do. But it just really felt like so incredibly crushing. And it was the suddenness. So it was January 23rd, actually coming up on the 10-year anniversary of his passing this year. But it was January 23rd. And I was driving home from a hot yoga class with a friend, and my mom called and just kind of blurted out that he passed away. And I have very few memories like from this exact moment in my life, just because I think it was so painful that I blacked most of them out. But it was just really devastating and horrible and happened again so quickly that it was like everything was just escalating. And I was crushed and I didn't know what to do. And I went back home I'm from Orange County, so I'm from like an hour and a half south of UCLA. And so I went home for 2 weeks and my dad's family from the Bay Area came to stay with us. And I just remember spending a lot of time in nature and being like, I need help to sort this out. I don't know if I go back to school. I don't know if I defer. I actually have no idea what to do. And I frankly am way too emotionally exhausted to figure it out. So some higher power help me. And I then began a relationship with my soul. So I would go to the park, I would write in my journal. And it was even just like right after his passing that I think my soul almost like swooped in to be like, we need to get all hands on deck. She is not going to make it. Like, she's not going to make it as far as like find her way through the situation. We need to be like here, present. And it's almost like my awareness was almost like thrust upon my soul because it was like like a tragic event happened that it was like it almost was like the Big Bang where it's like I suddenly became this like aware of this part of myself that was really wise and could help me. And I needed that because I was like, I truly have no idea what to do. Jesus, quite literally, and also metaphorically, please just take the wheel. Jesus being my soul. And so my soul took the wheel and it was like, hey, we should go back to school. We don't think it's worth it to defer because then you won't graduate with all your friends. Let's go back to school. And so I was like, okay, great. I'm going to go back to school. So I went back, finished up my senior year. And in the spring of my senior year, I was also exploring more of what I was excited about. I think I wrote a thesis, which felt really empowering for me because I was like, I'm going to write a thesis. And I wrote a thesis on the sustainable palm oil industry in Indonesia because I was an environmental studies major, was obsessed with the environment. And I started to really think about, okay, I suddenly live in this universe where my dad's not here anymore. And I don't want to work in an office. I remember that being really clear. My soul was like, we don't want to go to Washington, D.C., because I was looking at a lot of jobs in politics. And I kind of was like, okay, let's not go to Washington, D.C. then. I feel my mind, the mental part of myself, was able to be quieted down a bit because I frankly had no energy. Like, I didn't have enough energy to like force the shit that wasn't right for me anymore. And that was my soul being like, let's not drain a bunch of our energy trying to pretend like you want to do all this stuff that you don't want to do. Let's just find out what you actually want to do. And I was like, great, let's figure it out. And so I did a lot of informational interviews with people and I was like, okay, I don't want to go work in an office. That's very clear. And my junior year of college, I studied abroad in an archipelago of islands off the coast of Panama. It was my first time truly in Latin America, and I fell in love. And I studied abroad in these islands. It's called Bocas del Toro is the region, and the Smithsonian Institute, the U.S. institution, has a lot of research institutions throughout Panama. They have one research institution in Bocas del Toro, and we went to tour the research institution. I feel like I'm saying institution so many times, but we went to go tour it through my study abroad program. And I remember being like, whoa, this place is incredible. Wouldn't that be so cool if I could work here? It just was like a brief thought. But I was pondering what I really, really wanted to do. And I was like, you know what? I want to go back to Panama. I really loved living on an island. I loved being by the ocean. I just was really happy. And I think my soul just was kind of trying to get me back to the place I most recently felt so much joy so I could heal. And so I was like, okay, I really want to get a job at the Smithsonian, if I'm going to be honest. I have no idea how I'm going to do that, but that's really what I want to do. So I finished up my senior year and I was also applying to other jobs abroad. I was crazy, you guys. I would like email people like hundreds of times and just was I still had the energy to force opportunities abroad that I thought were meant for me that were not. And so I finished up my senior year and I hadn't accepted a job yet. And I was like, okay, I'm going to move home and I'm going to figure my life out, still with this goal that like somehow, some way I'm going to work at the Smithsonian. And so I moved back in, and that was probably one of the harder times in my life to move back to my childhood home. I'm just going to take a quick loss break. Where I live in Costa Rica, it is incredibly hot. And so I just have the AC pumping, even though it's 8:45 at night. And so I moved back to my home and, of course, my dad, having like passed away, that felt just like, oof, the tremendous feeling of his absence was so painful. And then Orange County has its beautiful parts. It is not uh, my soul's preferred habitat, but I was like, okay, we're gonna figure this out. And I moved home for about 6 months, and in those 6 months, I actually had so much time to study and develop my spirituality. So this is where we really went my soul was like, let's learn all the things we can about being a soul and spirituality. So, we got Eckhart Tolle, Power of Now, The New Earth, everything. I read all the books. I went to therapy for the first time, which was so helpful. And looking back, I see that my soul was like, let's help her kind of rest and recuperate, and then we can launch her into this next phase of her life. So that's what I did. I got a job at like an insurance company nearby, just worked, healed, read a bunch, went to therapy. And then I still remember I was sitting in my room one night and I had basically the Smithsonian Institute has scientists that are on staff that work in the different, well, actually, most of them in Panama are based in Panama City because they do their research there. So no, there's really no one based like in the at the Boca station where I really wanted to work. But my strategy was like, I'm going to email all these staff scientists and see if they need anyone to assist in their research. And nothing was hitting. People were not getting back to me, or they were getting back to me and telling me like I needed to be in a master's program. That didn't feel right. I wasn't ready to pursue my master's. And so I was like, you know what? One night my soul was like, let's go to the website and let's just email the person in charge of the Boca station, because that's where my soul really wanted to be, was specifically in Boca. I really didn't want to be in. I would end up living in Panama City years later, but very different vibe than these beautiful Caribbean islands. And so I remember I wrote to the staff, the person in charge of the Boca station, a very sweet Panamanian man named Plinio. And I was like, hey, this is what's up. Do you know anyone? This is me. Like, this is my resume. Do you know anyone coming through that needs help with their research? I would love to come work at the station. And by some miracle, he gets back to me and says, indeed, there is a woman coming who's getting her PhD in evolutionary biology and she needs an assistant. Write to her. Here's her email. So I wrote to her, the beautiful Yusan. I doubt you're listening to this, Yusan, but if you are, it was such good times. And so I wrote to Yusan and I said, hey, this is me. What's interesting is like I had research experience to an extent. Like I had worked in a lab for a bit at UCLA and then I had done some field research, but I hadn't, well, at that point, it would have been weird if I had been published because I hadn't really I didn't get my thesis published or anything like that. But regardless, I just was like, hey, here's my experience. This is me. Let me know if you're interested. And she got back to me and said, I think this is perfect. I start my project in January. Can you be in focus in January? And I was like, yeah, I most definitely can be in focus in January. And just like that, the job came through. And this helped me feel so I learned a couple of things through this experience. The first is that we're like, I want to describe this as if you're in a moment in your life that feels so opposite of what you want, which for me was landing back in Orange County after graduating, losing my dad. It felt like a traumatic kind of shitstorm. That is not your final destination. And if anything, you're learning something in that moment in time, or you might just need a minute to recuperate so you can go enter this next phase of your life. Co-creation is a dance, right? It doesn't mean that we're manifesting 24/7 all the time, 365 days of the year. Sometimes we just need a break, right? And the soul will create breaks in a variety of ways. So if you're going through a slow moment in your life, know that that doesn't mean anything about your final destination. It just means that you need a minute to pause. And I wish I would have known that because I was such a perfectionist and such an intense, like high achieving personality, especially in college, that I was going through so much. Like grieving a parent is so hard. And I was really hard on myself for also not having the best job or not having already gone to live in Panama. And I was like, yo, I just needed a minute, and it's okay to give yourself a minute. And truly, you guys, in overnight, my life changed. I moved to Panama and this next chapter of my life began literally overnight. So things can change at the drop of a hat, and where you are doesn't have to mean anything about where you're going. So please do not forget that. And really, overnight, my life did change. Actually, my mom and one of my sisters, Lindsay, came with me to Bocas, and it was really sweet of them. We all went together, and then they helped me settle in, and then I started my role at the Smithsonian. And my job was hilarious, you guys. I was a research assistant, as I mentioned, to this beautiful woman, Yusan, and she was getting her PhD in evolutionary biology. So my job was no joke, was catching poison dart frogs, essentially, because I was her assistant. She was studying the I should remember what she was studying, you guys, but it's a bit fuzzy. It was like studying the frogs and seeing if one type of the frog was going to become more dominant than another. So Bogus is a biological marvel. Like the nature is out of this world. It's a super unique place. The biodiversity wise, it's just a marvel, truly. And so basically the species of poison dart frog I was studying, the Umphaga pumilio for any nerds, they are a different color on each of the islands in the archipelago. And so there are a couple places where the two different colored species converge. So we were studying if like one of them was going to eventually like overtake another. And so basically it actually was rad. We took these little contraptions out into the rainforest and we had like fake frogs and we had the real frogs like fight the fake frogs. And then there was a way to discern who kind of like won. It was crazy and cool, but we also had to do a lot of like like censuses for the frogs. And so essentially just catch a bunch and then take note of what color was becoming more dominant. And so the frogs were only active in the morning. So I was getting up at like, I don't even know, 5 a.m. to go out and catch frogs from like 6 to noon. And it was really interesting and wild and just like silly. Like I just remember being like, wow, I've come off of 4 years of like, work hard, play hard, living in LA. I mean, LA, like I lived right off of campus, but so different from like living in the jungle and like waking up at 6 to catch frogs. And it was the time of my life, you guys. Like my soul was so happy. I just like, I remember setting out on the dock. The Smithsonian had like a beautiful dock and reading my book as the sun set and just being like, there's no way that this is life. Like this happened for me. I'm so incredibly happy. So I was catching frogs and also just like realizing how much I didn't love field research. The research part was like not my soul's vibe, but the experience of being in the jungle and living in Panama was definitely exactly what I was looking for. So I did this research. I was in this research position and I really wanted to stay. So I think my research position was only 2 months. It was quick. I was helping USON for 2 months. And then I was like, okay, I really want to stay. And I was like, Soul, please help me out. And I had this idea. There was the person who was in charge of the research station. Essentially, she would come through about once a month to come visit. And she was a female scientist. And it's funny because everybody was like, she's really scary. And I was like, she's not scary. She's just like assertive. Like, why is everyone afraid of assertive woman? She was actually not scary. And I basically decided that I was going to go to her office one day and tell her that I wanted to do all of these environmental projects around the research station and ask for funding, which you guys is so ridiculous. Like owning, I mean, no, my ego would definitely do this, but my soul was just like, why not? Like, what's the worst thing that could happen? She says no. And so I basically was like, okay, I want to we weren't really recycling. It's very complicated to recycle in island ecosystems. So no fault of the Smithsonian, but I was like, we should definitely be recycling. We're supposed to be studying the environment. Come on, this is like basics. So I wrote up a proposal for these projects and I went to her office and I pitched her. And she was like, I'll never forget this day. I was like on cloud nine. She was like, okay, I see the potential of these projects. I can't pay you to do them, but I can pay you to work in my lab and then you can do the projects on the side. And I was like, okay, that sounds great. And so she gave me a paid position in her lab. And you guys, I am the worst at lab work by like meaning that detail, like super detail oriented, like scientific work is just not my soul's jam. Like I worked in a research lab, as I mentioned, and like I was just terrible. It's like not my God work, that is for sure. But I was like, you know what, whatever. Um, I can do this, and then I could do these projects on the side. So then I get this job for 2 months studying sea urchins. We actually were studying how sea urchin larvae were being affected with global climate change, warming ocean temperatures. So we would have to spawn the sea urchins, which is like, get them to release their sperm essentially. And it was my friends and I would just like play hilarious, like sexy songs in the lab when we had to spawn them. It was just really silly. And I basically just did a bunch of lab work so I could do these projects on the side. And it was ridiculous, you guys. I was planning a farm at the institute. Like I just remember being like, okay, I guess I got to go harvest papaya seeds. I would like there was the Smithsonian like owned a farm nearby, and I would go by this really sweet Panamanian man. And so I would go out on the boat with him in the morning to his farm, which is on a different island, to collect papaya seeds to bring back and plant a farm. Insane. This was technically my job, right? Like I was getting paid to work in the lab, but I was also doing these projects on the side. And it was the most validating experience for my soul because I was like, what the hell? I was like, this is my life right now. Like I go harvest papaya seeds. Like it was insane and so lucky and so amazing. And I was having such a good time in Bocas. I was like meeting really good friends. So something I fervently believe about the soul is like always trying to give you the full plate life. So it wants you to have like satisfying relationships and friendships and a great job. It's not trying to compartmentalize so much. We compartmentalize. We're like, this is work and this is when I see my friends. And, of course, we need to have some sort of boundary in our life where we understand that we're not always going to, it's like when it's time to work and like we need to differentiate. But basically, this experience, the Smithsonian really helped me validate that the soul wants us to have these like full plate life experiences. Like I ended up meeting such good friends, such beautiful people. And it was so satisfying in my soul. I don't even have the words. Like it was beyond my dream come true. I was like, wow, I live in Panama in the rainforest. I'm doing environmental projects, spawning sea urchins. That wasn't fully the dream, but snorkeling, like part of my job was snorkeling, you guys, going out into the water. I was like, this is a joke, a time of my life. And basically knew I loved being in Bocas, but I was like, okay, Bocas del Toro, the islands. I was like, okay, I feel like my time was literally wrapping up. Like I forget how long, maybe my contract in the lab was like 3 months and I didn't really want to renew. So I was like, okay, what's next? Soul. And this was another pivotal moment because my mind could have easily interjected and been like, okay, this is a good time. Now let's like go get your master's, which it would do this later on. But at this exact moment, I still had enough faith and confidence because I had made this experience work that I was like, you know what? I can make this work again. And I know I want to be abroad. Let's see what my soul wants to do next. And so a couple of things. There was an eco village in Panama that was hiring interns. And I was so fixated on getting this one internship that I would like get obsessive and crazy and like write to them a million times. And nothing was coming through. And my backup plan, which ended up being my soul's preferred plan A, was teaching English. So at this point in my life, I spoke zero Spanish. I did not study Spanish. I studied Mandarin Chinese in high school because I was trying to get into UCLA, and Spanish is obviously too basic, right? So I had to study Mandarin Chinese. And then in Bocas, they actually speak a lot of indigenous languages. They do speak Spanish, but it wasn't a part of my work. Everyone at the Smithsonian spoke English, so I really spoke no Spanish. And I really wanted to learn Spanish. My soul was fascinated by the Spanish language. I loved hearing it. I loved seeing people speak it. I was like, I'm obsessed. So I knew I wanted to learn Spanish. And I also wanted to have a deeply, I would say, like community immersed experience because one of my soul's qualms with academia was that it felt really far removed. Like we weren't really doing research that was then going to come back and help the community. If anything, it was going to stay in a journal or I think I have such a healthier perspective now. Back then I was like such a hater. And I was like, there are so many flaws in this system and this is not for me. And I was like, okay, I can respect that this is not for me, but I don't need to, be hating on academia at large. Um, was not my path, was not my soul's path, but I had to entertain that potentially was a path. And then I was like, okay, not my path. And so I was like, I want to have this experience that's deeply like community oriented because I really want to feel like I see how change can happen at a micro scale, if I'm going to be honest. For any of my human design people, I'm a 5-1 in human design. So I'm a big like save the earth and save the people. It's like very authentic to my character and to my essence, I believe. And so I applied to teach English through a nonprofit in the US that I don't think exists anymore. It's called World Teach. And they basically place volunteers. So I got plugged into a greater program in Colombia, which I'll explain. So I ended up getting like a normal teacher's salary in Colombia, but I essentially realized that like this was a great organization. So I applied. I had applied to teach English with them previously, but my soul had a very interesting request. It wanted me to go to Colombia. And if you know nothing about Latin America, I mean, now Colombia is different. This would be in 2000 and how old am I, you guys? Maybe this was like 2017. It might even be 2016. And Colombia had just like a bad reputation. And I think in general in the US, our concept of Latin America is like everything is Mexico and Mexico is not safe, is like all we think. And so I was really nervous about this idea of going to Colombia, but that's like really where my soul wanted to go. And it like, I remember reading the pamphlets when I was originally interested in programs, and my mind was like, you should go to Ecuador because it's a bit safer, whatever that means. Don't go to Colombia. But I reading about all the programs, and I was like, oof, I really want to go to Colombia. Like I remember reading about this one volunteer's experience, and truly my soul, like something stirred within me where I was like, oh, okay, I really want to do this. And I had basically gotten into their Ecuador program, deferred so I could go work at the Smithsonian, and then was like, okay, I really want to go to Colombia, or if I teach English, I want to go to Colombia. So I decided to, I think I applied again to teach English, and they were like, no, we're definitely going to run the Columbia program this year. And, you're in, so let us know if you're interested in how you want to proceed. And then I read about all the placements, and they were offering English teaching placements on this island that's off the coast of Cartagena called Isla Baru. And I was like, okay, well, I want to live on an island. I definitely want to go to Isla Baru. Like that is my place. And the eco village in Panama was like really not working out. They were like, okay, I just wasn't getting any energy there. And so I shifted and was like, okay, I'm going to go to this island. And then I think 3 weeks before I was about to go to Colombia, but the biggest thing was that I definitely was nervous. Like I knew I wanted to stay abroad. I also went on a solo trip. I went to go work at a hotel in Nicaragua, traveled there by myself. I lugged my giant suitcase on many buses to get to Nicaragua. I just had so much more confidence in who I really was. And I had found this part of me that was a bit of a wanderlusty, travel-y person and such a big part of my soul. I really believe that. And that created a tremendous amount of confidence to feel like, okay, I could go to Colombia. And then I went for a run one morning. I was in Bocas and I picked up a piece of paper on the ground and it said Colombia. And I was like, okay, mommy is going to Colombia. So 3 weeks before I was about to go to Colombia, I got an email that said that they had canceled their program on Isla Baru. And they were like, can you go to Cartagena? Which Colombia has, Bogota is the capital. It's very big. And then Medellin is the second biggest city, and then Barranquilla, which is on the coast, and then Cartagena. So Cartagena is like the fourth biggest city in Colombia, and it's by no means big, but it's like a proper city. And I was like, oof, I don't know if I go to a city. Like I'm an island girl now. What am I gonna do? And something in my soul was like, no, go to Cartagena. You're gonna like it. Go to Cartagena. And so I say, okay, I decided I'm gonna go to Cartagena, and I went back to the US for like 2 weeks to get some paperwork done and then was on a plane to Colombia. And Cartagena is going to be like the last story I share here about the soul story because Cartagena is, I mean, I'll share like my full career trajectory on like a different podcast episode, but this is why I do so much work around soul work because I was on a mission to find my soul work. And Cartagena was such an important chapter for me at a soul level. I really feel like my soul came to life. It's like my time in Bocas, I healed so much and I my soul definitely came online. But Cartagena, it was like so much clicked and I felt so much more soulful throughout that experience. After that experience, like that really was joy. Like the loss of my dad was like the painful, tragic, like thrusting of my soul into my body or into my awareness. Cartagena was like I'd say the joyful, gradual increase of how much I really am a soul first for so many reasons. So through my program, I went to the capital to train to Bogota to do a training and then would eventually go to Cartagena. And I lived with the host family in Cartagena for the first 6 months because I wanted to learn Spanish. And I still remember you guys getting to my host families and just being like, I mean, terrified. I didn't live in a big neighborhood, but I lived in an apartment complex. And my window like looked out on like a quote unquote busy street. And I was like, oh my God, like I moved to this crazy busy place. Like, what am I doing? But I loved my host family like pretty much from day one. I lived with the most beautiful family. None of them speak English, so I don't know if they'll listen to this podcast episode. But well, actually, Gabby, who I call my soul sister, my like soul sister, she her English is good, so maybe she'll be listening. But my host family just became like so amazing, like such a big part of my heart. Like I just was like, wow, I really feel like I love these people and I just moved in with them and I can't even talk to them. My Spanish was still like zero, you guys. I lived in an apartment in a very cute neighborhood called Los Ejecutivos in Cartagena. I, in fact, could not say Los Ejecutivos. So when I needed to get a cab home, I had to write it out on my little burner phone so the cab driver would know where to take me because I was like, I don't know how to say this. And I loved living with my host family. So it was Maria, who was, she is, I mean, I guess the grandmother, I don't like calling her that, but her daughter, Mylene, I think was like her mid-20s at the time. And then she had a daughter named Gabby, who I call my sister. And the three of them lived together in this in an apartment, and I rented one room. It was a 3 bedroom, and then who I call my brother in a lot of ways, a Colombian from a different pueblo, a different neighborhood outside of the city, rented the other bedroom, Yvonne. And so we all lived in this apartment. And I still remember Yvonne like came into the kitchen one day and said like the most basic thing. I think he was probably like, "Hola, cómo estás?" And I just like panicked, and I was like, "Ciao," and like ran out because I had no idea how to talk to anybody. But I loved it, you guys. I loved my like my little room. I just felt so happy. And I taught in a public high school. So my first 6 months there, I taught at, guys, I really keep slapping my microphone. I taught at 6:30 in the morning every day. So I woke up bright and early to go to class. And I just felt almost, I describe it sometimes as when you move somewhere and it's like you almost melt into your life. Like things just kind of happen and it feels like you've always been there. Cartagena, there were things that I definitely had to learn to get used to, but I just was able to find my flow. And I met one of my best, best, best friends in the entire world who is just such a beautiful soul person in my life. And it was like the universe rolled out the red carpet. It was like, okay, you're meant to be here. And I really had so many experiences that were fundamental to my soul. Met my best friend, met so many good friends, committed to learning Spanish, and in a year and a half was pretty fluent. I had my longest romantic relationship with a non-English speaking, but really, really beautiful soul from Bogota. And I just learned so much about myself. I can't even, it was such a it was such a life-changing, game-changing experience for me was this time at Cartagena. And my soul, I think I just through that experience was able to anchor into my soul in a new way because I was like, okay, I moved to a foreign country. Not only did I adapt, I mean, I was living in Panama, but different, right? With coworkers who spoke English, like it was just different. So I'm like, okay, I properly moved to a foreign country. Keep slapping it. And I found myself, I found me. And I had no idea who me was because I only knew me in this very specific context of California and even my association with my family and, college. And I was like, whoa, I had no idea that I am who I am. I just surprised myself right and left. I loved to, speak Spanish, which I knew, but then I would not even really party, you guys. Like I really never have had the capacity to stay out late, but a couple of times like I would stay out super late and dance and go to bed at 5 in the morning and it didn't matter. And I was such a perfectionist that that was like foreign to me. I was like, there's no way I would ever do that. And then I was like, wait, I don't have to take my life so seriously. This could be the fat conclusion that we slap on the Cartagena chapter of my life. I don't have to take my life so seriously, and I don't have to take myself so seriously. Do I think it's really important to live an intentional life? 100%. But do I think that we make our lives way more serious than they need to be? Also 100%. And so this just helped me feel my soul for me is such a, fun, playful. My soul is just this joyful energy that will take me through hard times because I need to have them in order to grow and evolve. But it wants to milk the joy out of every moment of this life. And that was Cartagena. Like, I just could not even believe how joyful and happy and alive I felt, and how that really was my new normal. Like that experience made me realize that I was never going back to the life I had pre Columbia. My I was fundamentally changed. I was different. I have my soul to thank for that experience, and I'm forever grateful. And I want to close out here. I don't know how coherent this episode was, but essentially the soul origin story with the passing of my dad. I do briefly want to talk about grief actually, and then we'll close out because I did talk about like writing in my journal, but going through grief is profoundly, um, profoundly, I'd say it changes you truly at a cellular level. So, yes, of course, I had these experiences that helped my soul come online. But I really think that grief, when it's such a traumatic, hard loss, and if you've experienced grief, you know exactly what I'm talking about, whether it's like you lose a parent or, a caretaker, whoever they were for you, a sibling, a romantic partner. So, it's so catastrophic that you have to rebuild. It's like you could never try to go back or even kind of like rebuild based off of what you had because now your life looks so different that you kind of have no choice but to rebuild and from scratch. And I think that's really important because if I tried to cling on to my reality the way it was when my dad was alive, I was always going to be disappointed. And I could not perpetually keep myself in a state of disappointment. And so I think what my soul guided me towards was like, let's rebuild in a whole new way with your soul at the center. And in moving through grief, I think it's just so important to give yourself grace and compassion and time. Time, time, time. Time is not healing, but time gives us the space to heal if we give ourselves that space. It's not possible to get over. I actually hate that terminology when someone's like, "Oh, aren't you over it?" I'm like, "Ugh, ew." Like, yes, I've moved forward. I've taken that experience and I've turned it into gold that I now use to make my life better, but I didn't get over it, right? I moved forward. And you need to give yourself time to move forward. And with the energetic implications of grief, you want to see it as like, okay, I'm rebuilding. What do I want to do with this new, not new framework necessarily, but like this new, I guess, space to perceive life in a new way? And I really think that that's the only healthy way to move through grief. Otherwise, you're always going to be wishing that your life looked different. You're always going to be wishing that your life included that person. And it's okay to have moments like that. Everyone will have moments like that where they're like, oh, entertaining a different reality where they're there and you just want them. And that's so normal. But if you don't decide that you are going to rebuild, then you will always linger energetically in a reality that does not exist anymore. And I do think that that is just really painful. So don't do that to yourself. Choose to rebuild. And then in the choosing to rebuild, of course, my recommendation would be slap your soul in the center, let your soul do the rebuilding. And in those moments of grief, and I still have times where grief, boom, 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 grief feels heavier than others. The holidays are coming up. My dad was the king of Christmas. It's a hard time. But I think that looking back, the most important things were having so much compassion for myself, like literally letting myself just do whatever I needed to feel better and take care of myself and giving myself a ton of grace and space, and then letting myself actually follow what I really wanted to do and what I was really curious about, and having the courage and the grace to actually just say, soul, Jesus sounds way better or just funnier. Take the wheel. Like, I'm so grateful looking back that I was able to say, please, soul, please, please, please take over. And I'll have my doubts, but you take over. And if I want to pivot at any point, I will. But had I not decided to do that, and there's a different reality that I still think about sometimes where I didn't do that and I just took my mind and decided to go to DC or force myself to go to law school. That was a plan of my mind at one point. Man, I would have missed out on my soul. And I know I would have found it at some point in some other way because I have this relentless soul that never backs down. I'm really glad that I didn't waste time and I just let my soul take over and take me to Bocas, to the Smithsonian, like I always wanted, and to Cartagena that I had no idea that I would ever want, but it was the best experience. And our next episode, I will talk about, um, I won't finish this story. I'll go through my career journey in a podcast very, very soon. It might even be next week, you guys. I'm really flowing with this content. So we'll see. But I want to put the pin in there now because it just feels like I don't want to overload you with all of my soulful experiences. And those two were really the start of my journey, and they are always going to be such big parts of my journey. They made me realize that dreams can come true and your dreams can surprise you, and you are so much more than you think you are. I promise you are so, so, so much more than what you could even fathom yourself to be. And your soul knows that. And once you decide that your soul can make choices for you and you can really live by your soul, you will see that that is 100% true. And if you made it to the end of this episode, thank you so much for tuning in. I'm just so excited to be here with you guys and share with you and ideally guide you and help you live a beautiful, soulful, fulfilling, authentic, just magnetic, juicy life. And I love you and am rooting for you and your soul always, always, always. And I will see you next week.